I am Sabrina Lemire. I am a Senior Customer Success Manager here at Appian. I've been with Appian for about a year and a half, and prior to that, I supported the Navy as a civilian for about 16 years. And as a naval civilian, I supported various IT modernizations, digital transformations, and it ultimately culminated in becoming the CIO for Naval Information Warfare Center Atlantic, where we actually had Appian at the center of our intelligent automation strategy. So I became very familiar with low code. I became very familiar with establishing a center of excellence. And now that I'm on the Appian side, I get the privilege of working with folks like Brian and his team in helping them to establish their centers of excellence and work through their journey. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Brian Laird. He is a Senior Executive Service in SES with the Navy. He's the Assistant Commander for Supply Chain Technology and Systems Integration, and he also serves as their CIO for Naval Supply Systems Command. So we'd like to welcome you here. Thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you.
Great. So how about we get started by we learn a little bit more about what Naval Supply Command does for the Navy and how that relates to the overall Navy mission.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, good afternoon, everybody. So, Brian Laird, originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So, for those of you that watch The Office, that was me. There you go. I'm also a Baltimore Ravens fan. So, is there any Ravens flock here? Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Hey, so like Sabrina said, a little bit varied background. So, I'll go a little bit about myself and then a little bit about what we do with the NAVSUP and the Navy in general, right? So, personally, not Navy uniform. So, I spent a number of years in the uniform service career Army, so did not do the Navy thing. As a civilian, regular civilian, joined in, worked with Defense Logistics Agency, so really did wholesale supply, storage and distribution, that kind of work. And then about 4 years ago, I entered the Senior Executive Service with NAVSUP, actually in landlocked Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. It's about south central Pennsylvania, just outside of Harrisburg. But what we do within that framework, so Navy Supply Systems Command is usually referred to as the Navy's end-to-end supply chain integrator. And really, what does that mean? For most folks outside of the Navy. So think about really four main, business lines. I'd say one from a supply chain perspective, definitely responsible for any food and subsistence. So if you think about those ships you see on TV or those galleys that you see, writ large, any fresh fruits and vegetables, any ice cream machines out there, we work that. See, I have a Navy captain in there laughing with the ice cream machine. Any of those folks really talk about the supply chain that goes from the vendor to the ship or to the shore where we need to go. That's what we manage. From the NAVSUP perspective. We also manage the Navy's non-nuclear ammunition supply chain. So if you think about what's going on right now in the Red Sea, everybody heard about Israel lately, all those non-nuclear type missiles and munitions that you hear expended are actually managed through my organization to our system called OAS, which I'm more than willing to talk to you folks on, about a little bit later. That's the second line. The third line is really what we call sailor and family support. So if you think about uniformed sailors, they have to have some place to live when they're either ashore or afloat, and they also need some place for those families to actually, shop for subsistence, for commissaries, things of that nature. We manage that as well. So think about sailor and family support, data ammunition support, and really the food side. But really what we're known most notably for across the Navy supply chain and the DoD is really what we call our repairables business. Our repair business really has to do with from the point of demand to the point of a part breaking to the point that we field it, all through a weapon system's life cycle. So think about the time from a weapon system being researched, developed, used, sustained, and disposed of. We manage that entire supply chain. So think about the aviation components. Most people don't know is that the Navy themselves actually has more aircraft than the Air Force, which is interesting enough when you add up all the helicopters and the jets. I will tell you from the subsurface side, from the non-nuclear submarine side, we manage those components as well from a supply chain perspective. And then when you think about the surface ship, so think about, for a non-Navy person, think about a surface ship as a destroyer, a carrier, an amphib, things of that nature. Anything from that deals with repair turnaround time, things about first pass yield. We talk about receipt stow issue in a warehouse. Anytime someone touches a repair port, whether it be for that aircraft, that engine, from that subsurface vessel, all the way through the supply chain from the vendor, whether it be Bell, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, et cetera. That's actually managed through us within NAVSUP. Rather large organization. You have about 23,500 folks. Our budget alone is about $33.5 billion a year. If you look at our warehouses in general, we carry about $8.5 billion of inventory at any given time. We also do a major contracting mission for contracting for those repair parts. What most folks don't know is that NAVSUP's actually responsible for about 40% of all contracting actions across the entire Navy. That's by volume, not by price tag, because obviously jets and aircraft carriers and things cost a lot of money. Those holes cost a lot of dollars, but the velocity comes through us. My specific job within the NAVSUP Clavency is really twofold. One is their chief engineer, but most folks, refer to me as is the CIO. So if you think about, from a chief information officer perspective, traditional roles such as software development, which we'll talk about here with Appian, enterprise architecture, cybersecurity, hosting, AI, ML, things of that nature, that falls under me. And then really from a non-traditional perspective, or what I call more leading edge type stuff, I think I mentioned a little bit about the AI. That's actually starting to gain a little bit of traction for us. I mentioned warehousing earlier, so autonomous robotics inside the warehouse for us. Obviously, we do a lot with big data, and we're doing a lot with IoT, which is Internet of Things mesh technology, in a couple of our peer side locations, and then most notably, the 5G experiments that we're doing across the board. Over in Coronado, which is on the West Coast in San Diego, we just received the Navy Award for our 5G facility, which is a smart warehousing facility, which really what we're trying to do is get the throughput velocity for parts from the warehousing in that rack all the way out to the pier side for use whenever somebody comes in for repair or for a need. But that's really what NAVSUP about, and that's really what my role is inside the organization.
It's a fantastically expansive role, and it is so important to the naval mission to manage all those workflows effectively, and ensure you're continuing to keep them modernized and leaning forward and continuing to help with the readiness of the Navy. So understanding all of those mission objectives and how your role is really central to serving as that chief information officer, leading the IT aspect of it and those key aspects of IT, how do you trace those mission objectives down to what your IT objectives are?
Yeah, so we do a lot of it's a good question, right? So we do a lot of benchmarking with private industry, right? And I'll tell you, when you look at what NAVSUP benchmarks against in private industry, there's three main. If you look at that heavy repairable side, I'll tell you, it's more like a Caterpillar, more like a John Deere, more like a Siemens, right? So how do we benchmark against those organizations? So we did a lot of look at that when I came in. I came into the organization about 4 years ago, like I said, right during COVID. And one of the things that I realized is I looked across, and there was a couple things that were missing. One of the things that was missing was a vision, was a strategy document. And interestingly enough, when you look across the DoD and the Department of Navy, we're not wanting for strategy. Right? You can start from the DoD level, the national defense level. You can actually go down. The CNO herself has her three main priorities: audit, sustainment, leader development, things like that. But within the Navy, the IT space, not wanting for strategy or vision documents, because there's the DoD cyber strategy, there's the DON CIOs, which is the Navy CIO's information superiority vision. Right. The problem that I had when I came across was I assumed this position. There was not a lot of what I would call visionary documents in place for us. And there was really nothing for our organization to coalesce around, right? So I'm not a big fan of vast strategy, and for the simple fact that a lot of people without a governance framework behind it or a process behind it, it really just becomes a piece of paper, right? So what we did inside NAVSUP is we did I call a campaign plan. It's really just the DoD parlance for basically a multi-year faceted strategy effort, right? It has 5 focus areas. And what we've done behind that is we actually put a governance and accountability framework that we operate against. So on a monthly basis, we actually go through my 5 main focus areas. I'll tell you what they are in a second. We have metrics behind that. We have governance sessions behind that. And what really started with just an IT-driven drill has now turned into a business-driven governance framework. So we now have our policy planning folks in there. We now have our echelon 3s in there. We now have our personnel folks listening in, and it's really driving, because what I've done with that campaign plan, as you've seen, is really, what are we trying to drive from a business perspective and a warfighting perspective? So when I broke down my strategy, it was really 5 main areas. One was, how do I enable the supply chain and the logistics? So what I would call logistics and supply chain enablement, it really has to center around, how do I align to broader Navy strategy? How do I get my folks to actually understand the end of what's that desired business outcome we have to do? And how can I do some network rationalization, some systems consolidation to get after that? The second piece was really speed and agility, and that was really our biggest main issue that I had as I canvassed the organization is that we were actually having some trust and accountability issues with folks, credibility issues, because our inability to deliver at the speed of which the demand was coming in. So we specifically put a pillar in for that, which is really about low code, no code, which we're going to talk about today. We do a lot with RPA, a lot about our agile maturity assessment, which I can talk to a little bit later. How do we actually get people measuring themselves and actually delivering at that speed? We have a data analytics pillar, which is really my goal for that, is can we actually get some type of self-service analytics to the edge for our users to use, right? If I had to say one big thing that I can do within my organization is, can I get all the way from the C-suite, which is I would call my commander, all the way down to the deck plate level or warehouseman, can they look at one common operating picture, or do they have access to the same data lake, the same authoritative set of data, but be able to do their own dashboard in order to curate their own set of either dashboards, pictures, decision-making criteria? That really is on our data side. The other side, the third side was really resiliency. That's really about, resiliency of systems and architecture. So obviously there's a cybersecurity component to that. But it's really less about that, and I would say it's more about high availability and high performance fault tolerance for some of our systems. I think most folks know, and we'll keep it classified in this room, Admiral Davidson has a window that says that China will probably most likely look to invade Taiwan in the 2027 timeframe, if not sooner, plus or minus. So do we have the right systems in place, the right architectures in place, the right redundancy in place to be able to fight in that kind of unclassified or classified domain? And finally, we have what's called strategic partnerships, right? So that's really how do we partner with industry to bring best practices, to bring tools, to bring improvements to the organization, right? We have partners, obviously, with Appian. We look at low-code, no-code. We look at cloud computing services. We look at research advisory services. But how do we look to others to come and actually improve the fight? But then also, how do we come in inside the organization, inside the Navy fence line, to actually produce a more measurable result? And I think, Sabrina, you are obviously the CIO within Naval at NIWC. A lot of what I do is a lot what you did as well. And of course, as a taxpayer, that bothers me because now there should be synergies or economies of scale when we go across, right? So that's really where I fall in, and that's kind of how I kind of manage myself when I first came into the organization.
Yeah, and it's so refreshing to hear your IT strategy, and there really are so many similarities, to your point, between how you traced from those business and mission objectives down into some rallying vision for your organization. So it traces all the way down to the deck plate. It gives some measurable objectives for those teams to really work towards. And it's also interesting to see, when you look at Gartner and you look at their top trends across the entire aspect of government IT, you look at and you see these common trends, and they all have led us in similar directions. When we're thinking about application modernization, the research is illustrating that low-code platforms are really leading the way from a governance perspective in that modernization for legacy applications. Hyper-automation, a Gartner coined term, right, where you're layering those different aspects of automation on top of one another. Hyper-automation was central to my IT strategy back when I was CIO at NIWC Atlantic. How are we layering notions of RPA with workflow automation in order to make business processes more efficient? And of course, really central to it all, and this is so important when we're talking about the government, is maintaining that mission focus and ensuring that we're illustrating and we're measuring that value. Are we truly performing and meeting and then exceeding that vision and those objectives and outcomes? And are we doing so in a way that is making the user experience better? So it's interesting to see that these are the trends we're following right in line.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about the metrics perspective, right? So I think one of the things I have to do as a CIO is really not look, when you look at my title, really it talks about systems integration, which really has to do with the insertion of technology or the adoption of technology. But that's not a technology problem, right? And I think most technology folks will tell you that's more of a people problem and business process problem, right? And I think one of the problems that we had within NAVSUP, and at least even probably today, is a lot of the metrics that we have in place when we did our agile journey. We're certainly measuring planned to done ratios, sprint velocities, turnaround times, things like that, uptime, downtime. But the problem that I have with that is really they're all IT-driven metrics, right? When I go talk to the comptroller just sees me as doing my job, right? Not really, transforming the organization or driving the organization, and then really just keeping the lights on. Really what we have to do from a metrics perspective is how do we turn those conversations around to say, how do I drive a business outcome, right? So for my organization, when we look at these legacy applications, it's not an uptime or downtime, and it's really hard to sell to a comptroller or others about, hey, we really need an application because it needs to be up or it's been up or delivers a contract writing capability. Really, it's about I really need to improve repair turnaround time to get a part to a ship quicker, or I really need to decrease the total cost of ownership so I can reinvest into readiness. And one of the things that we see, and to your point, is there's metrics. We have metrics, but the line of sight between the business outcome and why we actually have that metric back to how we're managing really matters in an organizational change effort.
No, and it helps to keep people really centered and attached and feeling like they're providing value as an individual resource, which is so important to maintaining our resources and reducing attrition in the government space. I want to talk a little bit more now about our journeys with establishing a low-code platform and our journeys in establishing a center of excellence. I'll start by talking a little bit about NIWC Atlantic's journey. When I first came into the command business process role and CIO role, what I initially recognized was our organization was very siloed in how they looked at their business processes. They were lobbing things over the front fence. Things were very manual. We were in woeful need of digitization for our business processes, workflows, automation. And then the other big aspect that we were combating was there's an absolute lack of governance. So change management was all over the place with the organization, and there wasn't a central tool or platform in order to enable workflow and enable us to break down those organizational silos and process silos. So what we did was we laid out a set of requirements for business process management and workflow automation capability, and Appian came in to serve that role. We established it with the intended notion that that platform was going to be central to our overall command business process orchestration. That was the platform. We weren't just going to solve one problem with it and build one application with it. We were going to build the ecosystem of business processes in that application. And we were going to leverage our governance in order to manage that demand to do that. So that's where we start to talk about these notions of a low-code center of excellence. The 5 core competencies that are related to that center of excellence. You want to think about your vision. You want to think about how you're doing fit assessment and that demand management for your center of excellence. You want to think about how you're going to upskill and train your people, your platform. How are you going to think about your performance of your platform and the capacity of that platform to meet user needs? And in our case, thinking about it to solve multiple problems. And then an architecture and delivery aspect where you're starting to think about how are we going to rapidly deliver capability and shared services to our user base. So that was the NIWC Atlantic journey. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to the notion of having a low-code center of excellence and how that journey worked for you all.
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you, Appian was not on our mind, several years ago, right? It was, when I assessed the organization, I assessed 2 real main problems. One was, we weren't delivering to the speed to capability wasn't there, speed to market wasn't there, right? And actually had a trust and capability factor, an issue, to the point where I saw proliferation of shadow IT. I saw people actually going around the NAVSUP CIO office and actually going around our subordinate echelon to actually deliver solutions from other commands. And to me, that caused me some pain, right? The second piece was, it was through no one's fault. It was really just how our portfolio and ecosystem, like you said, kind of developed. And, to share a little bit of dirty laundry, without saying the number, I'll just tell you our portfolio of legacy systems, when you looked at the technology that was behind it, Java, .NET, Oracle, dare I say mainframe, we had a number of different technologies that was behind there. So I don't think we were even in the state that we could mature our portfolio and even improve speed to capability, because we were prioritizing based on an old set. We were training people on a numerous set of tools. So from a CIO perspective, I looked at that and I said, gosh, I have a lot of money that I'm putting towards this organization to improve speed to market and deliver capability. But where's it going, right? And what we realized was, one, we had way too many tools and way too much technologies, in our portfolio. But 2, we were actually looking at it from a way where we were very siloed in how we resourced and how we prioritized and how we executed our software development practices, right? So of all those portfolios and all those technology we used, I'll look at one business line, which is our repairables business line. We have a system that we use strictly for our organic repair shops. We have one for our commercial repair problems. We have one for our retrograde processes, right? For our procurement side, I have one system for solicitation, one system for contract writing, one system for post-award management, one system for auditing, right? The problem that comes is, one, I proliferated systems, and I'm also proliferating different languages and different tool sets that I have to maintain, right? So we challenged ourselves and said, let's look at this differently. Let's look at this less by system and look at this more by capability, right? So instead of me managing a set of systems towards a capability, let's have one process owner that can speak for the customer experience for repairs management or for procurement or for finance. And once I was able to get people talking like that, then it was, well, now how do I manage and move people around to best support that? And like I said before, that the ecosystem of tools that we had was just proliferated, right? So we said we really need to look at some type of low-code or no-code tool where, one, not only can I coalesce around that, but now I can actually train my staff, my labor, at least my organic labor, where I may not have the domain knowledge or the system knowledge across the portfolio, but I at least have a baseline set of understanding of what that language is, so I can then move Bob to Sally to Susie to whomever when I have to surge or go past, right? So that's kind of what led us to think about that, right? And as we started to think about it, we said, let's do this in more of a deliberate way, because I think everybody has looked at Gartner and others, and they look at the quadrant, or you look at Forrester and you look at the wave, and there's a whole slew of low-code, no-code products, right? So what we did is we actually had a bake-off, right? We essentially had a bake-off where we define what that problem statement would be, because we also, obviously within the government, we have different levels of security and classifications and problems we have to go by. We created a rubric, which is really just a set of evaluation criteria. We went into a bake-off when we came out, and to be honest with you, Appian actually scored high on pretty much all fronts, right? So we started that a couple years ago, and to date, we now have folks trained in that. This year, we actually have a couple applications starting to deploy heavy. We're doing fit assessments for the future, and then in 25, we actually have some of our aging systems, i.e. mainframe systems, that are actually slated to go to Appian as well. So that's a lot to say that, you know, we had problems with resourcing, prioritization, proliferation of tools, et cetera. Does that make sense?
No, exactly. And very similar to what we dealt with. And you know, as I continue to watch NAVSUP Atlantic from this purview now, and even engaging with NAVSUP, it is so exciting to see the momentum that gets built as you have one application go live, you measure that value, you illustrate that value out to users and to leadership, and it builds that momentum. You also see how maturing these different aspects, these different proficiencies that we talk about in the center of excellence, how that impacts your ability to accelerate and get value out faster and maximize that value, because you're maturing those key aspects that help your team to move faster and help the organization to receive it and move faster through that. So I do want to switch gears a little bit.
Yep.
Let's talk about challenges. No implementation or IT modernization comes without challenges, and no CIO would be honest with you if they didn't say that they dealt with a lot of challenges in their day-to-day role. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these IT modernization challenges that at least we've discussed as commonly encountering as we went through this journey. Gaining that organizational buy-in, driving the appropriate upskilling, value management, building that proposition for continued investment and momentum into it. And of course, that builds on the organizational buy-in. And then from a government perspective, cybersecurity and compliance is central to ensuring that you have that authority to operate and that you're maintaining an appropriate security posture for that very important data that we're managing in those systems. At least in the case of NAVSUP Atlantic, and I certainly even recognized it more when I came over to the industry side of the house. I didn't recognize fully how I didn't have the full organizational buy-in. We still had been encountering some aspects of resistance from folks who had historically lived in a high-code world, right? And some of our more skilled resources were somewhat resistant to engaging in low-code. So we shifted strategies on that. And that's what led us into an updated upskilling strategy. From a value management perspective, I'm an industrial engineer by trade, so everything is all about measuring performance, ultra efficiency. So that was always something that was central to our process improvement initiatives that really fed in through our Appian low-code platform, and ensuring that we were measuring that value and, kind of to your point earlier, speaking in the language that finance and the comptroller speaks to, so that you could continue to justify that investment to continue to build applications in the platform. We also experienced some challenges when it came to cybersecurity and compliance. And what was interesting in all these IT modernization challenges that at least I experienced in my role I found that through partnership, through focusing on those proficiencies, we started to overcome them and overcome them more rapidly. Through engaging Appian, and in fact, that's when we procured Accelerate and got that team to come in. We got some more reach back. We gained more understanding of the Appian platform from a security perspective, from how to drive that upskilling and how to measure value. We started to see more momentum built through that. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your challenges and your experiences.
Yeah, I think cybersecurity obviously is always an issue, right? And I think that that's always going to be a challenge. I would tell you within NAVSUP, we had a boon here lately, so I'm now my own functional authorizing official, which means I can accept more risk tolerance, and I have a little bit more risk tolerance than what typically did, so I can kind of get through there. So I'm not sure if that's a past challenge, probably not as much now, but I'll tell you, similar to what you had talked about, though, I think organizational buy-in, for sure, and I know I have some of my folks here, in the audience for sure, and they will tell you this, but, when you look at our portfolio and our organization, a lot of people have been working on systems for 15, 20, 25 years, and that creates a lot of blood equity in what they're doing. And when you start to come in and say, I'm going to change the process, and I'm going to change the language you use, and I'm now going to change your system, you get a lot of passive, if not active, resistance to that kind of change, right? So I think it's less of technology, and I joke because my title says technology integration, right? And tech insertion, which that, to me, I always struggle with that piece of it. It's because of that organizational buy-in. I think if anybody read John Carter, about the frozen middle, I will tell you as a senior leader, if there's anything that I can do to create efficiencies, like you said, if I'm a comptroller, if I'm an ops guy, if I can reduce turnaround time, if I can increase readiness, that's what I want to do. If I'm on the ground floor, I want to be innovative, I want to modernize, I want to do that work. But when I actually have people in an organization, change is hard. And to that individual, it is exponentially more difficult and sometimes very personal, right? So, how I usually talk about this stuff is less about the technology itself and more about what are we really trying to achieve and what's the business outcome we're trying to get after. And I think once you paint that picture and you can get after that, I think you can start to get some buy-in on there. The one thing I talk to my teams about is we say we're agile, right? And we've all gone through the safe agile methodology and we do all this kind of stuff. But are we really? Are we still looking at waterfall processes? Is our metric still waterfall? Are we actually, gold plating solutions and waiting? And I would argue, at least in my organization, they would much rather see little bits of incremental improvements or some vision to value here in little bits and pieces, as opposed to waiting for something that's a 90-95% solution, right? So what we're trying to do in NAVSUP is let's look at our quick wins first, right? So right now we have a service delivery model in place where a demand comes in for whatever, whether it be a new piece of software, new capability. It gets ingested into the organization, it gets reviewed by enterprise architecture folks, and then we decide where it goes, and then we kind of barter back and forth with the user to refine the requirement in the field. We've now adopted what I think I told you before is an Appian first mentality. So if anything comes into the organization through that process, one of the first questions that I have for that team that we've now ingrained in that is, can this be done in Appian? And if not, why not, right? And I think the only way, if left to the own devices, I think processes will revert to the old. And I think, no offense to people, because I am a person, but I think, change is hard, and I will always default back to what? To what's most comfortable and what's easy, right? So I think sometimes as a leader, you actually have to shock the system a little bit, put management controls in place. So right now we're putting controls in place to look at Appian first, right? And then once we look at Appian first, we start to see, what's out there. Right now we're starting with some contract writing capability. We've done some tech data package work. I think this summer we're actually going to do our first move from what we call our old SPS, which is our old contract writing capability, into the new piece using Appian, so that's going to be a win. I think my biggest tipping point, though, Sabrina, is going to be if I can get my logistics centers. This summer we're going to get Puget Sound and Pearl into that system. If I can get Jacksonville and Norfolk, which are my really big heavy hitter contract writing folks, I've now crossed that tipping point, and now I can start that flywheel effect. Then I can start doing it as long as I can do with other small increments as well. Now I start to get buy-in in the organization and I get through. The biggest challenge, though, outside of that IT community, though, like I mentioned before, is how do I communicate this to my comptroller? Because at the same time, I'm not only trying to do what I am in Appian or low code, I still got to maintain a whole legacy set of applications. And if anybody's watched the news, an ongoing CR which is a continuing resolution, and lack of a budget for the government does not help me, because now I have to prioritize where I send resources. So I think you have a lot of external factors that come in there. But all that being said, I think it's less of a technology problem. It's more of a people problem. And the more that you can tie it back to organizational vision, the real business outcome you're trying to achieve, and get quick wins. One of my old bosses, Mark Heinrich, he was one of my mentors early on in career. Yeah, he probably copped this from somebody else, right? But he had said, paint the big picture, think big, start small, and then iterate, right? And I think that's what we have to do here is think big from a low-code perspective, start with some small wins, and then start scaling. Does that make sense?
Yes, and you basically painted the picture of this slide, the journey overview, right? Build on those building blocks. Start with that targeted problem, get that flywheel going, right? Get the buy-in. And when you start with that low-code first notion, right, you continue to scale and bring more people into that ecosystem. You force that change management, and you're also increasing the return on investment for that platform in itself, right? Which, as I always was looking at every budget year, because I was going in, it was overhead dollars, I had to defend my budget. Every tool had to earn its keep. And the more we were able to put into that ecosystem, the more it was earning its keep. And it also was decreasing the complexity of how we had to upskill and train our resources. The other big aspect that you spoke about is changing and innovating the way you lay out your IT, right, and your organizational structures, and thinking about it from a capability perspective and how that even changes how you budget things. And that's where you start to get into that more disruptive innovation. So your building blocks truly are coming into place. Where do you see yourself in 2 to 3 to 5 years then along this journey as you start to really get to that step 4 and 5?
Yeah, so I think, you mentioned something that caught my attention, right? Because I think we talk technology and we talk people, right? But it's the process piece, right? And I talk about putting management controls in the process. But what we're doing in one of our organizations to actually affect this change is we're actually standing up our own division, our own department to focus on, these type of technologies and these type of innovations to start small, right? Let's get a group of smart people that are motivated, that know what they're doing and can really cause change, and let's see what they can do, right? So that's kind of where I see ourselves this summer, is standing up that new department and to start putting these little bits of capability through. We've done our assessments, last year in 2023. Right now we're in 2024. We're actually starting to get some bits of capabilities out there. But to be frank, it's really through brute force and oversight. It's really not through the acceptingness of the organization. So, standing up the new department, ingesting it through the management controls is going to be good. Contracting writing capability, which you're aware of, is first here. We're going to have some bits here in 24 with more in 25. But really our 25 is when we have our fit assessments for our really fast movers, right? And my charge to the team has always been, let's look at those, let's do fit assessments, that's great. Let's talk governance, that's great. But in the end, let's get something out there. And the more that you can get that out there and you can sell the value from an equity perspective, your comptroller buys in because she sees total ownership costs going down. Your primary mission partners, your stakeholders start to see capability in. So now trust and credibility goes up. And next thing you know, at least from a government perspective, and now bring on new customers, a reimbursable stream. So what I'm thinking I'm going to see here is a couple bits of capability deployed here this summer. 24, we have a lot of our big bands going to happen. But hopefully by 25, we have that flywheel or that bullet effect happening that we're really running in a low-code aspect. Right?
Oh, it's so exciting. And I'm excited to see, not just NAVSUP, of course, and what we've seen with where I came from, NIWC Atlantic, but seeing this across the entire naval enterprise, and also the synergies of how we can share this across the entire DoD and government space.
Yeah, the whole shared service concept, right? And we work closely with DONCEO and, the old SOA construct that people used to talk about, shared service construct. The more that we actually have from a stewardship perspective, right? And I said I'm a person earlier, right? But I'm also a taxpayer. So I want to make sure we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure we're doing things properly. And right now, I would argue that a lot of our organization looks at themselves as unicorns. I'm a unicorn, I need a system. Really, and you're not that different when you look at it from a different lens, right? So if we can challenge that as leaders, we can challenge that through business processes to make some hay. I really think we're going to get that change management like you mentioned.
No, it'll be exciting. Let's wrap up. So some of the key takeaways that I really think about from a low-code program perspective and where these centers of excellence drive is it requires a team lift and a partnership. That was actually one of my key themes, and it sounds like it's one of your key themes, right? You can't do this alone. You need to team with the business, right? You need to team with your system integrators. You need to team with your technology providers. You need to break down those organizational barriers to drive outcomes. It's all about partnership and transparency to drive those outcomes. Center of Excellence is an intentional thing. We need to think about how you're going to stand up your platform. How are you going to drive that organizational change? How are you going to drive and upskill your resources in order to be the most effective organization you can be around low code to drive those mission and business outcomes? Decreases complexity. If you're low code first, right, now you have less types of training, less types of code bases that you have to manage and sustain. It's truly decreasing that and allows you to be more resilient in the things you are focusing on and allows you to become experts in providing those services. And finally, knocking down those process silos. Really thinking about how things flow from an end to end so we truly are orchestrating and innovating an overall operational change to our organizations. So with that, we will open it up for any questions from anyone, if anyone has questions in the room.
I think they're gonna make it speaking normally.
Yeah, I had a quick question. In terms of what's the difference between purchasing or acquiring a platform for a portfolio versus using it for a single project or business purpose?
I think that's yours from an Appian perspective.
So from an Appian perspective, and we see this across different clients, and then I'll, of course, defer to you, sir, but, we want our tools, at least in my case, we wanted our tools to earn their keep, right? We weren't just buying unitaskers, right? So when you're going into looking at your set of capability gaps and requirements, if you're buying a unitasker, it's going to be really hard for that unitasker to earn its keep. You really want to think about how can I most broadly meet these capabilities so that it truly is earning its keep, providing a high amount of value, and again, decreasing that complexity in the portfolio. It also helps, from a government perspective in decreasing the complexity to the amount of things you have to maintain compliance around and keep those barriers from a cybersecurity perspective. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing I'd offer, right, I use the word platform in a couple different ways. One could be, can I standardize on a low-code platform, and also can I standardize on a hosting platform? I will tell you, and some people don't like when I say this, but I'm agnostic on my hosting platform. Again, I think the Navy has invested a lot of dollars for a lot of different capabilities, regardless of what cloud platform or hosting site I use. But I think that there's synergies in actually using, similar ones. So I would offer that. From my perspective, if you're talking a hosting platform, I'm really agnostic. If I can decrease risk maybe through a subscription service is something I'd like to do. But if you're going to ask more on the detail, I'd have to defer on how our pricing model works.
No, and that truly starts to feed into that notion of enterprise IT services that the Don CIO is driving. And through building once and using often, you're enabling those service providers to truly become experts in what they're providing. And again, it creates a larger value proposition. Hopefully that answers. Oh, yes.
Do you have any recommendations in terms of training and the structure of the Center of Excellence? So are you would recommend to, make use of contractors or train your own resources? What is the main strategy?
So initially, I'll go through my example. Initially at our organization, we started by internally training our government resources, a very in-house type of strategy. And we did that intentionally because from an in-house perspective, they understood, they lived and breathed those business processes on a day-to-day basis, right? System integrators in some cases would come and go. However, we did quickly learn that it was important to reach out and to have that partnership and to ensure that we were partnering with system integrators that also had a lot of Appian and low-code expertise that allowed us to scale more appropriately. So one of the big things that we see success in, of course, is obtaining those Appian certifications. Getting that in-person hands-on training is so valuable, and continuing to engage and use those capabilities so they remain fresh and you continue to build on them. Another thing that we see is successful, especially when developers are earlier in their stage of their journey, is having someone who's more experienced as a coach, right? So when we formulate our pods, we'll have a pod who has someone with a lot more expertise who's leading that pod, so they're coaching the less experienced developers as they continue to mature and grow in their low-code expertise.
Yeah, and I think I think I'm getting the flag here, but I guess what I would answer you from a practical standpoint as someone that's going through it, I would tell you that, my opinion would be, let's not forget that the folks in your organizations that are going to be asked to do this are probably already doing something else today. So you really have to be intentional about what's the ratio between organic and contracting staff plus up. But the other thing I'd offer is when you figure out what that ratio should be, let's not forget that a low-code platform, enterprise platform like this really shouldn't be, in my opinion, an IT-driven effort. Really what you want to think about this is more of a business transformation effort. How am I identifying, ingesting customer demand requirements, testing them, and then delivering them on the outside? So if I can think about it that way, change management comes into place, receptivity to change comes into place, not just the tool itself. So I would offer that let's not forget the resourcing piece, but that it's not just an IT implementation. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think I'm getting a red blinky up here.
Oh, we're getting the red blink. We're getting the cane. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions afterward, I'm always happy to answer and follow up. Thank you.
All right, thanks.